So I just finished reading Wild is the Witch by Rachel Griffin. And first we need to talk about how gorgeous this book is. I mean, look at this cover, okay? I didn't even know what the original book was. I didn't even know it existed until I received this in the Bookish Box subscription from August. And I mean, it's got this beautiful like plasticish cover. Beautiful inside. It's signed. And my favorite thing of all, the gilded pages here. I'm just hold it up for as long as I can. Though I did laugh a little about how big the font is. I mean, I don't know if you can see. My brother used to come in when I was reading books like The Queen of Air and Darkness, and it's like 700 pages. And he would make fun of like how big the font is and how easy it was to read. It always reminds me of that. And this is a pretty short book. Yeah, it's got a little bit over 300 pages, but if you shrink the font size down to most of the normal novels, I bet you it wouldn't even take up half of this book size. I finished it on my hour break in 2 days while I was at work. It's kind of like in school when they used to make you write essays, and if you run out of things to say but you have to meet the quota, you kind of use a lot of double spacing and write big fancy words just to like meet the word count. There's a lot of like witchy books out, I noticed lately, and plot-wise, this is similar to those. There's always a council that young witches have to answer to when their behavior is questionable. I don't want to spoil too much, even though a lot of it is in the summary, but something happens in Iris's past that ends up with the town kind of like slandering witches, and it leads to them having to move away to a new town in Washington. They end up actually taking over a refuge. And it ends up being really good for them that this move, because they end up reconnecting with nature. And while she's there, she kind of ends up like closing herself off to the exposure of her being a witch, because she's afraid of uprooting her family again. But still, in secret, she revels in the feeling of magic, because it's a precious thing, and it's special to have this connection. And they're not like traditional magic now, where like not just kind of practicing magic makes you a witch. There's this trend that I don't know if I'm fond of or not, where like you're either born one or you're not, and you can only do magic if you're born one. But when they're actually working magic, you can actually like visually see it. There's little particles and special effects that happen that make it obvious somebody's doing magic. Like sometimes they call it starlight, or like a magic wavelength. And pretty early on, she meets this boy. So you see where I'm going with this. He's super salty towards her, and he ends up he hates witches flat out. And he doesn't know she's a witch. But she has this coping method of her emotions by doing this fake ritual that her grandmother taught her, where it's like she comes up with spells, but she doesn't actually cast them. She just sort of pretends to go through the magic and then snuffs it out before it actually goes through. They call it giving it back to the earth. So one day, he really irritates her, and she comes up with this, oh ha, got you now, like pretend ritual. Or a curse, actually, which is pretty heavy if you ask me, but it's a curse, I mean. But before she can actually snuff it out, an owl swoops down, very ominously, and absorbs him to himself on accident. Or is it? So she freaks, okay? Because this is awfully bad. The last time something like this happened, it ended up horrible. And the rest of the book is them actually trying to trek through this forest to track down this majestic owl without him finding out that she's been a witch this whole time. Her goal is to retrieve it before it can actually get out and take effect. And I'm not going to lie to you, this is 100% a romance book. Even though there's not like a lot of sappiness in it, but it's written really well in the way that it's Iris's point of view. And as we kind of follow her in this journey of getting to know somebody else besides being stuck inside herself the whole time. And it's very beautiful. I mean, the whole book is beautiful. I love the writing. There's an atmosphere to it. It puts you into the scene, and then it makes you feel like you're the only ones there with the characters. The sentences are just like aesthetically pleasing to hear in your mind. And there's such a connection to nature in this book that you can imagine the view of the forest, like as you're going from place to place. It's so peaceful, and it's somewhere I want to go if you're going somewhere to find yourself. So if you're someone who enjoys reading about that kind of stuff, wanting to get back in tune with nature or like a spiritual thing, then you'll be very pleased. It's calming, like watching somebody go on a hike. And of course, it's not all good, because nature is wild. Animals have lived this long and survived on their instinct alone, and the weather is constant and unpredictable. But the book uses this as a way to bring the two of them closer together, and to better understand that there's always two sides to every opinion. You don't always have to agree on something, but you need to respect each other's opinions. Character-wise, there's a couple. There's like a handful of characters, but there's only two. There's only actually like two characters. There's Iris and there's Pike, and I love Iris. She's strong, she's clever, she doesn't take shit from anyone, especially Pike. She speaks her mind, she listens to her instincts especially. But she is emotionally driven, and anxiety gets to her a lot of times because she tends to overthink. And it's interesting because we get to watch her talk herself down. It's relatable. I mean, she harbors a strange feeling of guilt a lot of the time, like she feels everything is her fault. And sometimes I can't help but feel that it is. I feel like this whole situation could have been avoided really easily, and something like this was a really stupid choice. The rest of the book I'm fine with, but it's just how we got to this point that I don't understand. There's plenty of other coping methods, like why don't you get a journal? But she strives really hard to make things right, and her main thing is that she cares about the animals. Pike is almost the same way, but his strength is charisma, especially when it comes to dealing with people. He's fascinated in her connection to nature because he can't get himself grounded in that way, but he's more of an intellectual where everything in his world can be rationed out. One of the best things in this book is the dialogue. A lot of it is witty banter and sharp comebacks, but it's clever. It's not just dialogue for no reason. So anyone who wants the enemies to lovers trope has their plate full here in this book. This is all this book is. But it's not in an annoying, forced way. It doesn't feel rushed or unearned, and I like it. I mean, I usually don't even read stuff like this. I had no idea what the book was about when I went into it. All I know is that it was sent to me, and it had a pretty cover, so I'm in. And you have two very different people, one who's ruled by logic in the head and the other who's ruled by emotion and the heart. And when you're together like that for so long, you start to realize how selfish you've been by not being able to understand what other people go through, and that everyone has something that they want to keep private or that they don't want to share with people they hardly know, at least until they end up having to work together for a common goal. It's also important to learn that everything doesn't have to be done alone. I found myself wondering about the rest of the stuff in the book besides the romance. Like the magic, the rules of magic, the other people who use it, or, the other witches. What are they like? Is there a bad one out there? Does an evil one exist? Because I know they were very specific about there being 3 types of witches, but we only really stayed with Iris, so it doesn't seem like there's much of a point to the others. But I just reminded myself that it was less about world building and more focused on mostly just these 2 characters coming together. I don't even really know how I felt about the ending, because I felt like after the owl that the rest of it was just going to end now. And it did seem like kind of a light punishment for what she did, but she's the main character, and I get it, we're past the main part, you just need it in the book. And I can't really think of anything else that could really be appropriate to a character who's so likable. And I really wouldn't call the book fantasy, really. Just like fiction. Contemporary seems close, but fantasy is too strong, so some are in between there. The owl is also a major part of the story. It makes me respect the animal a lot more too. I've always had an affinity for owls, but they really put an emphasis on how majestic they are in this book, which is really cool. It's always been a sacred symbol, especially way back with its close relation to Athena and the wisdom. And there's an implication that it's doing everything on purpose. And people are taught to look for signs and the meanings in everything. And I mean, I always think there's no such thing as coincidences, but how do we truly know? And that's all I have to say about this book. I wouldn't go into it looking for a fantasy read, but if you really want a random enemies to lovers trope, or just you want to read more about witches, and or you need something to feel like a bingo card related to nature, or owls maybe, you got it.